Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised,
I have ordered attacks on enemy military
targets. There could be no greater good than the quest for peace, and no finer purpose than the preservation of freedom.
My name's Howard Breitenfeld. Served on the Midway in 1949, 1950, 71 years ago. I had been in the Navy approximately 13, 14 months, and I got orders to report to the Midway, which was a dream come true, because I joined the Navy to see the world. So I reported to the USS Midway in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was so proud. My dress blues were really good looking. I shined my shoes. My white hat was on perfect, and I walked up to the Midway, and I just said, holy fright, what a big piece of metal.
World War II breaks out for America with Pearl Harbor. We've got sky-high budgets right now. The Navy wants to go ahead and produce 4 of these very large armored carriers. Midway proceeds along, and eventually she is ready to be launched even while World War II is still being raged. But as it turns out, the atomic bombings bring World War II to an abrupt end just 1 month before the new armored carrier USS Midway is commissioned. But as it turns out, throughout the rest of her career, really, the Navy was very determined to get every ounce of use out of the investment they made in World War II. Aircraft carriers before World War II very rapidly became important and needed ships. And in the case of the American Navy, they decided we want to be able to have a carrier that could still have the large air groups that we favor, but we want it protected too. So that meant having a ship that was really large in all kinds of proportions, and for the first time, they were willing to consider committing to a capital ship that was too large to fit through the Panama Canal, if that's what it was going to take to be able to have everything you wanted. The designers in World War II, of course, were working with a clean slate. They had really no basis with which to learn from, and so they wanted to emphasize the survivability to battle damage, and so that meant, of course, armor. It also meant very thorough subdivision. For the first time, we have a capital ship where each engine has its own room. And another factor was armor's heavy. And when you have a heavy weight up high, that causes stability concerns. And so one of the ways to mitigate the stability issues was by shaving off a few inches between the heights on the decks. So to this very day, Midway has a relatively low overhead for the kind of ship she is. And then when you factor in piping and ducting and all that, the clearances really get so low that in certain parts of the ship, you still have to duck just to get to the other side. One thing that makes a warship unique is that the mission comes first and you live around the machinery, or you live around the weaponry, or you live around the design, not the comfort of the crew.
In those days, the rack was a flat piece of canvas held on an aluminum bar with rope, and then there was lockers at the end. So in that space, there were 6 sailors.
This really got to wear on crews, and so the complaints started coming back rather early about how cramped and confining these ships were. So the Navy never repeated that. When the new carrier, the supercarrier Forrestal, was created, they didn't have those kinds of problems. They just simply made the ship much bigger to be able to accommodate all that. The issue with the Midway's design was that she was designed originally to fulfill a specific set of expectations, being a survivable aircraft carrier in an era of high explosives, torpedoes and airdrop bombs and such, and still operate a very large air group. They, of course, could not anticipate the revolutions in aviation technology with jets, or have to have the ability to be able to morph the ship as necessary to acquire new combat systems, new communication suites, and such. So it's amazing that you wind up having a ship designed in the 1930s and 1940s still proves to be ultimately adaptable to human ingenuity over nearly a half century afterwards for things that the designers in 1940 couldn't possibly have anticipated.
My job was up here on the flight deck, the V-1 division. I was a plane pusher. All the airplanes up here on the flight deck, when I was here, they all had propellers. There were no jets. So we pushed those planes around by hand. So we would take them from the hangar deck, bring them up on the elevator, bring them forward to where they were going to take off. And we were the last ones there. We'd have the chocks that were put under the wheel. We'd pull those out, and then we got out of the way.
One thing that was occurring with all carriers is the fact that jet aircraft were really posing a severe challenge to safely operating high-performance aircraft at sea. Straight decks and jets did not go well together at all. And so one of the things the British did was they found out a way to modify aircraft carriers to operate jets effectively. And one of those modifications was putting an angled deck. So that way a jet can make its approach on an angled deck and you don't have anything interfering with a parked aircraft or anything like you did with the straight deck. And if he missed his approach, couldn't trap his wires, he'd just simply gun the engines again and come back around instead of risking flying into the parked pack.
3 weeks ago, here on the flight deck, I talked to 2 young Marines. And they asked me the same question: how have things changed? And I had to really think about that because in my eye, it hasn't changed. It's a little different now because of the angle deck, and I know the electronics are probably better, but the thing of it is, people don't change. When you're 18 years old, you're the same today as I was 71 years ago.
What makes Midway interesting from her generation was that she stayed an active deploying carrier throughout her career. Some of her World War II era contemporaries, Essex-class carriers, stopped being deploying carriers. The Navy was determined to make sure that Midway was always able to go out and operate at the far ends of the world conducting American foreign policy. It's remarkable that you take a ship that came from an entirely different era that was still just adaptable enough to be able to keep her in the forefront when clearly you started to get later ships that were more carefully tailored for the situations that they existed in, and yet Midway still persisted and remained that way until the surprise ending of the Cold War and what was thought at the time to be a radically altered world environment.